Hi, everybody. Welcome to class today. We're learning about the Monroe Doctrine, a really important principle in American history today. And we're also learning a skill called how to interpret a political cartoon. So these two things go together, and this is today's lesson. Now, the Monroe Doctrine is part of our International Week we're working on this week. On Monday, we spent some time with the Louisiana Purchase, and a big piece of land we bought from the French. So that's in part dealing with a foreign nation during the early 1800s, or what we often call the Age of Jefferson. Second story we did was about the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean Sea and how the United States, for the first time ever, sent a military force out of the United States to deal with a foreign problem successfully. On Wednesday, we did the story of the War of 1812, where we're learning about how the United States has fought the British a second time. And while we're not really that well respected among the leading nations of the world, we're going to start to begin to develop that kind of respect now that we've beaten the best army in the world twice. Beat them in the Revolution to gain our independence, and now we've beaten them in the War of 1812. And we'll start to gain some respect as kind of like an adult nation among the adult nations. In 1823, the United States, under President James Monroe and Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, issued what we know today as the Monroe Doctrine, saying more or less, European nations, you must stay out of our part of the world. We will stay out of European affairs, but any European nation that interferes in the Americas, North, Central, and South, will have to deal with us, the United States. Well, we'll talk a little bit later about, is that really something we could possibly have done? We're sure talking tough, but maybe we're not as tough as we really talk. But let's look at how you interpret some political cartoons. We'll learn that skill, and then we'll practice it with a Monroe Doctrine political cartoon. By the way, if you haven't heard of President Monroe before, well, there is Monroe County in Pennsylvania. There's Monroeville in Pennsylvania as well. There are a lot of places named for President James Monroe. But here's our big skill for today: how to interpret a political cartoon. When we see a political cartoon, there are four things we want to try to figure out. Who is the speaker, meaning who is delivering a message? Who is the audience? Who is supposed to be receiving that message? The third thing, what is the message that the speaker is sending to the audience? And what symbols are being used? You know, a political cartoon is often very small and can't have a lot of words in it. So we use pictures or symbols or things that people who understand American culture would understand what they are. I think you'll do pretty well with this. Let me show you some political cartoons that were in various newspapers and magazines recently here in America, like this one. And you see this big monster in the doorway that says the internet on its belly. And it has a suitcase that says scams, chat rooms, predators, porn. The monster is standing in a doorway, and there's a kid in the doorway. You know this is a kid because, well, the kid says, I'll move myself over here. The kid says neglected on her shirt. She has braces and freckles, and she's answering the door and says, Mom, Dad, you can leave now. My babysitter's here. And you can see this big monster. The internet is about to come into a house. And the little title says, Speaking of Scary. Well, there's the internet. So who is the speaker? Well, the girl, yes, is speaking to her mom and dad, but really the person writing the cartoon is kind of speaking to the parents as well, saying maybe the internet is not such a great babysitter. Who's the audience? Well, parents, mom and dad who neglect their kids would be the audience. They are supposed to be receiving this message. The number 3 says, what's the message the speaker is sending to the audience? Is don't let your kid be babysat by the internet. There's a lot of trouble out there that kids can get into. What symbols are being used? Well, certainly the symbol of the big scary monster and that's coming to your door, and maybe even the idea of the internet being as a symbol as well, because it represents something much bigger than just itself. How about this one? Another internet kind of thing. So There's a bunch of little guys with big long noses, with fake stuck on their noses and news on their shirts. And they're saying, it's on the internet, so it must be true. Well, who's the speaker? You could probably interpret that several ways. Yes, these little characters are speaking. Maybe it's just a word of caution. They're saying, whoa, do you really believe this? Who's the audience? I suppose it would be anyone who is using the internet as a source of news. Just because it's there doesn't mean it's true. And that really is the message the speaker is sending to the audience. Be careful of what's on the internet. There's a lot of fake stuff out there, whether it's news or ways to invest your money or things to buy or all kinds of things. The message is about being careful with what you believe that you see on the internet. What symbols are being used? Well, who is this little guy with his big long nose? And is a story really about lying. Well, that's Pinocchio. And Pinocchio was the little guy whose nose would get longer every time he'd tell a lie. Well, you can probably see that these noses are pretty long. There's a lot of lies out there on the internet. One more to try a skill. Let me put myself at Thanksgiving dinner. So we have a family seated around the table, and there looks like grandma at one end, grandpa at the other, with mom, dad, kids, and everybody in between. And they have a big turkey and all the different items you might have to eat at Thanksgiving. Grandma is saying prayers, saying a blessing for the food. On Thanksgiving, we ask help for the homeless, the jobless, the helpless, the hopeless. And Grandpa says, and the clueless on wireless. Amen. Well, who is the speaker? We might say, oh, it's the grandparents or the older generation. Or maybe the speaker is anyone who is sensitive to the time that others spend on their phones. Who's the audience? Well, really, I suppose it's the people who are on their wireless phones all the time, even maybe during prayer at Thanksgiving dinner. What's the message? The message, I suppose, here's a big family event, and everybody around the table is withdrawn into their own little world of internet, their own thing that they want to be on, not really paying attention to the rest of the family at a very important holiday. And so some symbols being used would be any of the Thanksgiving, any of the Thanksgiving feast celebration things, and a family sitting around a table. So all those things would be part of the idea of interpreting a political cartoon, trying to figure out who is the audience, who is the speaker, what's the message the speaker is sending to the audience, and what symbols are being used. Now let's try one that is for you to show me, do you think you can do this? I bet you can. I'll just help you with this in a minute, and then you'll go open the document that's on your Canvas page that has this same political cartoon and gives you a chance to respond to who is the audience, who is the speaker, what's the message being sent, and who is supposed to be receiving that message, and what symbols are being used. So take a look quick. Symbols could include places on maps. It can include this dotted line, maybe a line in the sand. A symbol could be a stop sign. It could be the American continents. Also, you want to think about who's actually speaking here, who is delivering a message, and then who is supposed to be receiving that message. And finally, what is the message is part of the activity. So when this video ends here in a minute, go ahead and open the next document here on Canvas. Let me scroll down to this again. There we go. You're going to open this Monroe Doctrine document to show you've learned the skill of interpreting a political cartoon, telling you who is the speaker, who is the audience, what's the message the speaker is sending to the audience, and what symbols do they use to communicate that message.